All right. Well, it is 7 o'clock. And as those of you who know me know that I like to start on time because we have a great event tonight. And we want to make sure we get to all of your questions afterwards. So my name is Cindy Elder. Good evening, everyone. I am the executive director of the Barrington Land Conservation Trust. And on behalf of our volunteer board of directors, welcome to the sixth event in the 2024 Land Trust Learning Series on nature gardening with Doug Tallamy. And for those of you who have just joined us while we're getting ready, I invite you to type your name and your location into the chat. Before we get started, I would like to take a moment to just reflect on the original stewards of this land where I am sitting right now, the Pokanoket tribe. We're privileged to share their ancestral homelands and to work and live among the many Pokanoket people who still reside here. We continue to learn from their example as they show us how to care for Mother Earth and her inhabitants. I'd also like to express thanks to our amazing partner, Barrington Public Library, and Siobhan, who's behind the scenes here working her magic. And I'd like to recognize our leadership sponsors, the Shaw's Foundation and Santander Bank, and our partner sponsors, Gunnis Financial Services, Bank Newport, Prickly Ed's Cactus Patch Native Plant Emporium, and Rhode Island Natural History Survey, as well as our community sponsors. All of them make it possible for us to offer the learning series to the public at no charge. We also depend on the generosity of our members and our supporters to care for hundreds of acres of conservation land. Thanks to all our supporters out there in TV land. If you haven't had a chance to join our merry band of space protectors, please visit blct.org and click the donate button. It's my favorite button. And now I have the pleasure of introducing a man who is no stranger to many of you. Doug Tallamy is the author of Bringing Nature Home, The Living Landscape, and New York Times bestseller, Nature's Best Hope. Doug, a renowned entomologist, has helped a generation of people understand the connection between insects, plants, and the ecosystems they share. He's the founder of Homegrown National Park, a movement encouraging everyday people like you and me to make a difference in our own backyards. I had the pleasure of listening to Doug's presentation at the Audubon Conference in April. Since then, we've been making a few changes in our backyard, taking advantage of the green space we control to create habitats for insects, birds, and other lovable critters. A quick word on logistics. Doug will share his presentation, which will last about an hour, and then we'll take questions. You can enter them into the Q&A feature on Zoom. And may I just suggest that you wait to type your questions in until Doug is getting close to being finished. So let's say about 10 minutes of 8, start getting your questions in there, as he may answer some of your questions along the way. So Doug, I'm looking forward to getting inspired by you all over again. I'm now going to attempt to stop sharing my screen and to allow you to share your screen while I turn my video off.
There we go. How's that working?
Perfect.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for that introduction, Cindy. So we talked about, this is going to focus on nature gardening, and it certainly is, but I've actually written a book about this, and Timber Press wants to call it, How Can I Help Your Questions About Saving Nature with Your Yard? And the reason I wrote the book is this. Now, I don't have to remind you folks that we are evolutionary guests on this planet, and our stay here is provisional. If we destroy our life support systems, our stay is going to be a short one. That's just common sense. Now, because every person on the planet depends entirely on the quality of Earth's ecosystems, and every person bears the responsibility of taking care of those ecosystems. The good news is more and more people are accepting that responsibility. That is great news. But they need more knowledge to act on it. So what do? They send me emails asking for that knowledge. Now, I've written books, I've given talks, And I still get really good questions that I haven't covered, and I get them all the time. So I decided to compile a number of the answers, actually 490 of them, into a book that again, they're calling it How Can I Help? Saving Nature with Your Yard. Tonight, I'm going to talk about 33 of those questions, and I will start with question 1. I get this all the time. What got you interested in conservation? Well, I was born loving nature, so there was no trick to that. But we moved into a new development when I was in 3rd grade, 1959. And our lot was the first house to be built in this development. And the lot next to me was undeveloped for a full year after we moved in. There's a little pond on the lot, looked just like this. And I used to go over there and check out what was happening in that pond all the time. And in the spring, toads came and sang. I thought that was really neat. I don't remember whether I knew they were males or not, but shortly thereafter, bigger toads came and the singers hugged them. And I thought that was really neat. Then, of course, they kept hugging them till the eggs were laid. That's the male, of course. He's going to inseminate those eggs as they come out. The eggs hatch into little polywogs. I got to watch all of this. It was fascinating. Those little guys first develop hind legs. Then they get forelegs. At the same time, their tail starts to shorten. And it gets shorter and shorter. And they actually make little forays out onto the land. And when they're ready to come out, they do look like little teeny toads. That's what they are. And they are little teeny. Well, I wanted to be next to that pond when all of these little guys left. I was there the day they came out by the hundreds, maybe the thousands, but that also was the day that the bulldozer came and buried that whole pond. Made an impression on me. The impression was that we've got to save the nature that is left. It was the conservation strategy of the day. Whatever's left out there, we have to save it before people destroy it. But we have to move beyond that mindset. I didn't realize that at the time, but we have to move beyond that mindset because very few of us have the opportunity to save pristine habitat. What we can do is to restore habitat that's already been lost. What I could have done was go right next door to my own yard and dig a new pond and save many of the things that had been buried by the bulldozer. It never occurred to me, though. And, my parents probably would have helped me dig it. So that wasn't the issue. It's just that I never occurred to me. So as a matter of fact, it didn't occur to me for about another 40 years. Question 2, why can't insects quickly adapt to non-native plants? This is a really good question. We hear all the time about how quickly insects can develop insecticide resistance. And of course, they're sprayed with insecticides all the time, and they can do that very quickly in just a few generations. So why can't they adapt to non-native plants and we wouldn't have the problems that we have? Well, insecticide resistance is a little bit different. If you have a population of insects, let's say we have a population of this moth, a few of them already have resistance to the insecticide. So when you spray this population, all these guys die, but these guys live. And the next generation, they're the ones that have mated and laid eggs, and many more of them will carry the resistant genes. And then very quickly, in just 2 or 3 generations, everybody is resistant. You're selecting for particular, just a very few genes that convey resistance. Finding a new host plant, adopting a new host plant, one they've never seen in their evolutionary history, is far more complicated. We have to consider all the behaviors that are required for an insect to find and use an appropriate host plant. The first thing you have to do is find it. They're flying around out there, and there's a matrix of hundreds or thousands of types of plants. They have to pick the right one out of that matrix, and they do it with their antennae. They smell the appropriate odor of the host plant. They zero in on it. So in order for them to choose a new plant, they've had to have mutations in the receptors of their antennae that say this new plant is acceptable. Then when they land on the plant, they are tasting it again. There are receptors on their feet. So they smell it, it says it smells right, but they also have to essentially smell it with their feet and say, yes, this is actually the correct host plant. So you would need simultaneous mutations in the tarsal receptors at the same time. Then finally, there are receptors on the ovipositor that are actually tasting the plant final time before they lay the egg to confirm that they are in the right place. You'd have to have mutations in those receptors as well. So then they lay the egg. This is a red spotted purple laying egg at the very tip of a black cherry leaf. That's where they lay the eggs. The larva hatches. The first thing it does is eat the egg shell, because protein is always in short supply, but then they have to eat the plant. The question is, can they eat the plant? Will they accept this as a viable host plant? That requires additional mutations in their taste receptors, and then they have to have the physiological ability to get past the chemical defenses that are in this new host plant. So all of those things have to happen at the same time. They got to be able to detoxify those chemical defenses and accept it as a viable host. Find the host among an array of other plants, accept the chemical signal that the leaf waxes give off with their tarsi and their ovipositor. The hatchling has to taste the plant and accept it that way and be able to detoxify its defenses. All those changes have to happen simultaneously. They do happen simultaneously, but only very rarely. So host switches, that's an official host switch, they happen, but not often at all. It is far more complex than evolving insecticide resistance. And let's use the monarch butterfly as an example. We brought in the black swallowtail, swallowwort, the black swallowwort as an ornamental plant, believe it or not, way back in 1854. And it, of course, escaped. It's all over the place. Now, it is a member of the milkweed lineage. It's not the same genus, but it is related to milkweeds, and it smells like milkweeds to a monarch. They will actually land on it. Their antennae detect it. Their ovipositor accepts it, and they'll lay eggs on it. But when the larva hatches, it is unable to detoxify the compounds in black swallowwort. So after 170 years of opportunity, repeated opportunities, the monarch is still unable to use this host plant. That's how hard it is for a host switch to actually happen. Okay, question 3, you claim that it takes thousands of years, if ever, for insects to adapt to a new host plant, the host switch I just described. But some other entomologists disagree and point to several species of butterflies that now breed successfully on non-native plants. How do you explain that? Well, I explain it this way. There's a difference between host switching and host range expansion. Host switching is what I just described. You're accepting an evolutionarily novel, brand new host. You've never seen it before. Whereas host range expansion is you're accepting a new plant, but it is closely related to the plant you already have adaptations for. So eons for a host switch, but a host range expansion doesn't take any new adaptations at all. They already have all the adaptations for using that particular lineage. You're just simply adding a new member of that lineage to the experience of these particular plants or insects. So again, unlike host switching, host range expansion doesn't require any new adaptation, so it can happen right away. The black swallowtail is a perfect example. It, of course, is a specialist on members of the carrot family. And apparently it can eat many or all members of the carrot family. They all are very, very similar. So when we brought in Queen Anne's lace, carrots, dill, and parsley, all members of the carrot family, the black swallowtails already had the adaptations that allowed them to eat these plants, and therefore they can use them. And there's several examples of that. But if you actually look at what happens when you compare the insects, actually, this is just Lepidoptera, moths and butterflies, that are using native plants versus the ones that can successfully use non-native plants, and this is woody plants, there's a 90% reduction in the number of species that can use them. So this is the host range expansion and occasional host switches we're talking about, but it's very few compared to what most of the insects are doing. Bottom line is huge loss when we allow non-native plants to replace native plants. Okay, I live in an area with lots of Lyme disease. Several websites suggest keeping large lawns because they are not attractive to ticks. The sites also say I should get rid of brush piles because ticks love them. How can I contribute to local ecosystems without getting Lyme disease? Good question. And I'm going to attempt to answer it because I've had Lyme disease 5 times, so I know it's real. Let's think about what ticks need in order to thrive in our landscapes. Deer ticks do not eat native plants, so having them around doesn't create ticks. They do not eat leaf litter. They do not eat brush piles. None of that makes ticks. What they eat is blood. And they eat blood of particular animals. They need small rodents, and the white-footed mouse is one of their primary hosts, and they need deer. White-tailed deer is an essential part of the Lyme disease deer tick cycle. So we have Lyme disease today when we didn't have it when I was growing up because we got way too many deer. Because we didn't have them when I was growing up either. The deer are way over the carrying capacity, which has created a perfect storm in terms of a proliferation of Lyme disease. So if you don't want to get Lyme disease, the ultimate way to reduce the frequency is for us to get our deer numbers way back down below the carrying capacity. I know that's something one person can't do, but it's got to be a societal goal. But you can reduce the infectivity rates of the Lyme problem on your property by increasing the number of dead-end hosts. So there are other mammals out there that get those ticks, and in many cases, the Borrelia, the disease organism, does not flourish inside these alternate hosts. So when you have a series of other mammals on your property, they're siphoning off the infected ticks, and infectivity rates drop. In other words, it's less likely that you are going to get Lyme disease if you were bitten by a tick. And there's a great example of that in the South, where there are lots of deer and there's lots of deer ticks, but there's very little Lyme disease. Why is that? Because there are lizards, there are anoles, and there are skinks, several species, and they're all dead-end hosts. So these guys siphon off the tick population. Excuse me. A lot of them, a lot of the ticks will get on these little lizards. And that's it. That's the end of the disease cycle, simply by adding those alternate hosts. But remember, now Lyme disease is still a problem. What do we do about it? If you're not going to actually control the deer, remember what ticks do. They don't run after you. Going outside doesn't mean you're going to get a tick. They climb up on vegetation. They put out their little legs, and it's called questing. They just wave their legs, and if you walk by, they will grab on, and that's how they find you. So a landscape like this is a great way to avoid Lyme disease. You stick to the lawn. It is true, the ticks are not going to get in your lawn. You don't need acres of it. You just need to stick to the places where you're not going to brush up against other vegetation. If you go out in the woods and lay down in weeds and things, yeah, you're gonna get ticks. But particularly during May and June, the peak months of infectivity, stay on the swaths of grass that you maintain in your yard, and you will reduce the chances that you actually get a tick. Okay, plants and animals have always moved around the planet. So the arrival of new species at our shores is a natural process. So what's the big deal? If the new species are more fit than the species already here, then they deserve to replace them. I get this question a lot too, that, why don't we do the survival of the fittest? These invasive species are better, so we should have them. Well, the big deal is the rate at which we are bringing new species to our shores. Yes, plants and animals have always moved around, but it was new organisms coming into an area over courses of many thousands of years and typically millions of years. The rate was minuscule compared to what's happening now. We're bringing in thousands of species in decades. So it's almost an instant in ecological time, and that's the challenge. The ecosystems into which we introduce all these new species do not have the chance to adapt to the presence of that species. Are these new species more fit? You go into a natural area, and this is a preserve near me, White Clay Creek State Preserve. And every bit of green you're seeing there is an introduced plant. It's an invasive species. Because I took this picture in March when plants from Asia leaf out before plants from North America. So it's about 30% of the plants in our preserves, and many of the preserves are non-native. Are they more fit? No, they're not more fit. We used to think so. I even used to think so. They're super plants. They can outcompete our natives. The reason they can outcompete them, it gets back to too many deer. It's because the deer eat our natives and they don't eat those introduced plants. It tips the competitive balance against our natives. So if you're looking for fair competition and the winner should win, this doesn't make it fair. These guys they don't play fair. The baby oak comes up, it'll eat that immediately, but they're not going to touch the barberry. They're not going to touch the burning bush. They're not going to touch the autumn olive, the porcelain berry, and on and on and on. So of course, they're the only plants that are left. This is what an overbrowsed deer woodlot looks like. This is Japanese stiltgrass. They won't touch that. There's not a single native shrub coming up here because the deer eat them all, but they don't touch any of the non-natives. So the invasive species problem is actually a deer overabundance problem. You're not going to control your invasives until you control your deer. This is what a healthy understory looks like. Went to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park last spring, and they had a healthy understory. I hadn't seen one in years. And I'm the ranger next to me. I said, well, how do you control your deer? How can you've got a great understory? And he said, we don't control our deer. I said, then how come you have these plants? Where I live, none of these plants would be here. And he said, well, we have black bear, we have bobcats, and we have coyotes, and we don't shoot any of them. And they control the deer. Now, wolves are the primary predator that used to keep deer under control. They don't have wolves, but the black bear and those other things are enough to keep the deer under control so that you have a healthy understory. The understory of a forest is typically immature canopy trees that are just waiting for enough sun so that they will grow quickly when there's a tree fall or something. When we have no recruitment into a forest because of overbrowsing of deer, that forest it's not sustainable. So how should I control invasive plants? You can control them with mechanical methods. You can whack them out with a mattock. You've got to get the roots. Just snipping them off doesn't work because they all come back from the roots. You can use herbicides. A lot of people don't like to do that, but used properly, it can be an important tool in your invasive plant control kit. You can smother them. I'm not going to go into those methods a whole lot, but if you want to achieve long-term control, what you really have to do is eliminate what invasives like the most, and that is disturbance. Our invasives are thriving on the disturbance that we humans create in the landscape pretty much all the time. What's creating disturbance? An overabundance of deer creates disturbance. It browses out all the natives. Our own weeding creates disturbance. It opens up niches, tilling, mowing, invasive removal. We get the Boy Scouts to come out and remove invasives from 2 acres of woods. That is a huge disturbance. You have to have a plan about how to get the natives back without the deer eating them, because the invasives will take advantage of that disturbance. Sometimes the invasive itself creates a disturbance. Things like autumn olive are fertilizing. They're fixing nitrogen and fertilizing the soil, making it high in nitrogen when it didn't used to be. So there's increasing evidence. Trouble is, this takes decades, but there's increasing evidence that actually doing nothing in some cases allows nothing other than excluding the disturbance. So that means you've got to keep the deer out, but stop weeding, tilling, mowing, removing, and eventually our natives do come back. There's more and more evidence of this. Throwing that out as something that you might want to think about. If you can eliminate the disturbance, our natives should win in the end. And that's good news if that really happens. Okay, here's a good question. Should we kill invasive species? Do we have the ethical right to decide whether a plant lives or dies? Okay, that's a good question. I think it would be hard to find somebody who did not believe humans are superior beings to everything else. And if there's a conflict between humans and any kind of wildlife, humans should win. I mean, that's pretty much a universal thing, but I guarantee that lions feel the same way, weevils feel the same way, rattlesnakes feel the same way, and so do dung beetles. Everything thinks they are the most important beings on the planet. Now, if you question the right to manage invasive species, you have to think about what you're doing every single day, because decisions we make every day do determine what lives and dies around us. So for example, every time we select a non-native species over a native plant, we're deciding whether, for example, the chickadee in your yard is going to have enough caterpillars to feed its babies. This is crepe myrtle. It's making no caterpillars. You're not thinking about that. I plant your crepe myrtle, you've just reduced the amount of food for any breeding bird around there. When you decide you're going to have a couple acres of lawn or any lawn at all, you are where the lawn is reducing the amount of native forage for other creatures. You're deciding whether hundreds of species of native plants could be in this space and the thousands of animal species that depend on those plants. That's a life or death decision because you wanted lawn. Every time we hire a mosquito fogger, we're sentencing the monarchs, the pollinators, the caterpillars to death in this area, not just mosquitoes. I'm noticing that I'm really lisping. I lost a bottom tooth. Now they're going to replace it one of these days, but you have to get used to my lisp while we're doing that. So this is a decision that people don't think about. Do we have the right to assign all those creatures to death? So by not controlling invasives, what we're doing is gutting entire food webs. Do we have the right to do that? That's how I'm going to answer that question. Think about whether we have the right to do this. That's calorie pair. What about the risks of bringing nature into our everyday spaces? Isn't interacting with nature dangerous? If you listen to the news, it certainly sounds dangerous. If you go outside, something's going to kill you. Because the news sensationalizes any risk that exists. But here's an actual accounting of the risks we deal with most days. Now, snake bites, people worry about that. On average, there are 2 deaths a year in the entire country from poisonous snakes. Pretty low. West Nile virus, 130 deaths per year, usually older folks. It's out there, it's real. How does that compare to other things like the common cold? 5,800 deaths from the common cold. Alcohol, 75,000 deaths per year in alcohol. Melanoma, sunbathing, in other words, almost 8,000 deaths a year with 76,000 new cases of melanoma every single year. Car crashes are killing 44,000 of us. Child overheating in cars, tragically, 550 deaths. Dogs, man's best friend, killing 20 to 30 of us per year. Falling, 20,000. Overdoses, the big one, 109,000 deaths every year. Texting, 3,000 deaths. Autoerotic asphyxiation, whatever that is, 600 deaths per year. Hot dogs are killing 70 of us. Lightning, 51. Football, 20. These are real risks. Toasters, 370 people a year. Are we going to ban toasters? Selfies, 379. And we deal with these things by risk management. We don't worry about any of these things because we're used to them. Can you guess how many people were killed by native plant gardening last year? It's a risk we really can learn to manage. Okay, why do I only focus on moths? Aren't butterflies important too? Well, yes, butterflies are important. Everything is important. But butterflies are actually moths. If you look at the phylogeny of the Lepidoptera, here are moths over here are moths over here, and the butterflies evolved right in the middle of them. They are bad-tasting, day-flying moths, which is why they get to fly during the day, because most of them don't taste good, and therefore the birds leave them alone. So one of the reasons I focus on moths is that there's a lot more of them. For every species of butterfly, there are 19 species of moths, and because they are essential components of food webs, whereas butterflies typically are not. So ecologically, moths are much more important than butterflies. They're transferring more energy from plants to other animals than any other type of plant eater, which is why Dan Jansen calls them the meat and potatoes of terrestrial food webs. We can't do without them. Besides that, moths are really cool. And some of them look like that, just incredible things. Others look like rhinoceroses. Some look like fish, and that is not photoshopped, folks. A lot of them look like algae. Some of them look like rocket ships. Some of them look like stealth bombers. A lot of them look like lichens. There's the moth, in case you can't see it. Bird dew is a favorite thing for moths to look like. Nobody wants to eat bird poop, so if you look like it, it's pretty safe. Many of the caterpillars will disguise themselves with what they're eating. It makes them incredibly beautiful, but the crypsis is really good. These guys are looking just like the needles that they're eating. There's a caterpillar there. There's a caterpillar there. These are just really interesting things to me. Many of them look like dead leaves, and this is the winner right here. Actually lives in Japan. It's on my bucket list, but you can't beat that for looking like a dead leaf. Many of them look just like what they're eating in terms of seed pods. There's the caterpillar curled up inside of sunflowers. Some of them look like seeds themselves. Many of them look like sticks. That is the caterpillar. Or they look like sticks as adults. So this is the moth here, and it really does look like a stick. Some of them look like jet planes. Some of them look like skulls. Some of them look like angels. Some of them are red with white spots. Some of them are black with white spots. Many of them look like stripes. Some of them look like circles or like bullseyes or like clowns. So clown, I don't know why they want to look like clowns, but that guy and that guy come from different circuses, I guess. A number of them are looking like wasps. That makes sense. Or yellow jackets. That's actually a moth, believe it or not. Some of them have lightning logos on their sides. Some of them are huge. This is an atlas moth, and some of them are really tiny. That's a pinhead, and that's the size of that moth next to that pinhead. Some of them are beautiful as adults and as larvae, and others are not. Some of them have a startling effect. Some of them have two heads. Now, this doesn't really have two heads. Somebody asked me afterwards, do they really have two-headed moths? That's a mating pair, but it looks like they have two heads. Some of them are incredible snake mimics. That is a caterpillar. Some of them look like jewels. Some of them look like that. They're just fascinating creatures, and the diversity is absolutely endless. Do honeybees compete with native bees? This is an unpopular answer. But today, particularly with the way we have eliminated forage from our natural areas, yeah, really looks like honeybees do compete. And this is why they are extreme generalists. A single hive can be huge. It can house 30,000 bees, and they can forage up to 2 miles from their hive, which means a single hive can potentially compete with native bees over 8,000 acres of land. Now, beekeepers supplement their hives with sugar. So it's not a fair comparison again, because the honeybees always have food, whereas the native bees have to get it on their own. And that means their populations are always high, even when flower density is low. As of April 2022, there were 2.92 million hives in the US, which means honeybees have saturated the continental US 11.5 times. Now, if we assume native bee populations are near their carrying capacity, there's as many as the environment can hold, and then you add a single hive, 30,000 bees to that area that's already saturated by native bees, there's no way you can do that without degrading the resource for those native bees. It's an unfortunate truth that honeybee enthusiasts might want to think about. Privet flowers are good sources of honey and pollen for honeybees. By the way, honeybees are not non-native. I have to throw that in there. If we remove invasive privet from our natural areas, won't our honeybees suffer? Okay, another good question. Privet is an invasive plant, of course. There's actually 9 species of privet, and they're all highly invasive. That's me standing next to a single 2 or 3 bushes of privet, and it's everywhere. Over 100 million acres are covered in privet in Alabama alone, one state. Serious invasive problem down there. Now, privet blooms for about a week, 1 week during the year. And during that year, the honeybees have lots of forage. But what about the other 51 weeks of the year? The privet has pushed out the native plants, the other species of plants that bloom for our honeybees and our native bees, leaving nothing but privet. And that means 51 weeks of the year, it's a dead zone in terms of pollen and nectar. That's why we want to remove privet, because we got to get the diversity of the blooming plants back for our pollinators. Oaks are dying right and left, and as we cut them down, should we remove the logs of the dead oaks to prevent infection of other trees? Or can we use the logs on site? Good question. We do have oak diseases. We've got bacterial leaf scorch, we've got oak wilt, we've got sudden oak death syndrome, a little bit more to the west, but they're killing lots of our oaks. The disease organisms, though, are in the oak when it's alive, and the spores can spread during that period. Once the tree dies, though, that's it. The infectivity is not going to continue. So when you have downed trees, we call it coarse woody debris. It's actually a valuable habitat. If you have any opportunity to keep those trees on the property as dead wood, please do so. They are home to a zillion things. All kinds of species of columbial and springtails live in under the bark of those trees. Centipedes live there. Millipedes live there. That's where click beetles develop as larvae. That's where fire color beetles. This is interesting. If you peel back bark, you see these larvae all the time, very common. You almost never see the adults. Where do the adults go? I don't know. A lot of species of scarab beetles develop in dead wood. Cerambycid longhorn beetles depend on it entirely. That's what they're called, flat-headed borers as larvae. Same thing with leucanid stag beetles. They develop in dead wood. Petsalid best beetles develop in dead wood. Buprestid metallic wood-boring beetles develop in dead wood. And a number of species of butterflies overwinter in the cracks and crevices of dead trees. Things like the mourning cloak, commas, question marks, all can be found as adults in dead wood. And then, of course, we've got carpenter bees. Now, people get upset when the carpenter bees start to make the little holes in their porch railings or the soffits of their house. If we keep some coarse woody debris on the property, then these guys will have an alternative place to nest. And don't forget carpenter ants. Carpenter ants do not eat wood. They live in dead wood, hollow it out, and that's where their colony is. Why do we want carpenter ants? Because we want pileated woodpeckers. That's where pileated woodpeckers, that's what they rear their young on, carpenter ants. So you won't have pileated woodpeckers unless you have a lot of carpenter ants. And you won't have a lot of carpenter ants unless you have the big trees that make them when they're dead. Okay, question 13. What is the best way to plant and propagate milkweed? Seeds is the hardest way to propagate milkweed. Many of them are inviable. People plant them. If they do germinate, they're little teeny things the next year, and people get tired of waiting for them to become real plants. You can get a strong milkweed patch very quickly, though, if you dig up a small portion of your milkweed. They have these thick underground stolons. These are stoloniferous plants that then send up ramets. So if you dig up milkweed and cut off maybe a 2-inch section of these stolons, it will send up new ramets very quickly in the same year. Just plant it maybe an inch under the soil, and it's a sure thing, very easy to do, much easier than seeds. Speaking of monarchs, is rearing monarchs good or bad? It depends on what your goal is. We want to help the monarch for sure, but people are rearing monarchs for 2 reasons. One is educational reasons or for fun, and the other is actually for conservation. Now, there are a lot of benefits to rearing monarchs or other butterflies for educational purposes. First of all, you're exposing kids to some form of nature. It's a beautiful form of nature. It helps them to not be afraid. It demonstrates what the different life stages of insects are. These are holometabolous insects that have egg, larva, pupa, and adult, and they get to see all of that. That's complete metamorphosis. They get to understand about host plant specialization. You don't have monarchs if you don't have milkweeds, a 1-to-1 ratio there. And that's true for 90% of the insects that are out there. So kids and adults get to learn all these things by that rearing experience. When we're rearing for conservation, though, there are issues. It's very difficult to rear for conservation and not make a difference unless you crowd them. And when you crowd them, it's the perfect recipe for disease transmission. Even if these guys don't die, they could be carrying disease spores, and then there'll be problems when you release them in nature. You're also removing them from natural selection. There are things that are weeding out the weaker monarchs in the wild that we've protected them from here. So you're weakening the gene pool by doing this. If you really want to, there we go, I just said that. If you really want to help monarchs, the best way is rather than rear them, is to plant a big milkweed patch. The bigger the better, because that is what is in short supply for the monarchs. You will create more healthy monarchs by doing that without the problem of disease transmission if you plant that milkweed patch. Monarch caterpillars on my milkweed keep disappearing. I assume birds are eating them, but I thought monarch caterpillars tasted bad, so I'm confused. What is stealing my monarchs? I get this question for black swallowtails. For anything people try to rear, they say, well, they disappear when they're large larvae. What's eating them? What's stealing them? Nothing is stealing them. It's that these mature caterpillars, before they pupate, before they form their chrysalis, will crawl off the host plant and form the chrysalis someplace else. So this is a monarch chrysalis in my yard, and look, it's attached to a grass leaf. It's not on milkweed. I never have found a monarch chrysalis on milkweed. What they're doing is removing themselves from the host plant because the natural enemies, the flies that lay their eggs in the monarch and other parasitoids, the predators, they find their targets by finding the host plant that these caterpillars eat. So they want to get as far away from the host plant as possible. This is a pipevine swallowtail. Again, it's not on pipevine. It's a chrysalis. It's on grass. So to have your caterpillars disappear as they mature is totally normal. Nothing is stealing them. It's just that you're not looking in the right place for them. Okay, I recently came across an Asian lady beetle in my backyard. I can't seem to find a definitive answer as to whether they are harmful to the local ecosystem or not. Asian lady beetles were introduced back in the 60s, before there were good regulations about introducing biocontrol agents. They were brought in to fight ag pests, particularly aphids. They do eat a lot of aphids. As a matter of fact, they eat so many aphids that they are displacing the native species of ladybird beetle. They're also extremely variable. So this is one species here, but they look a lot different. It looks like a lot of species. You can recognize them by this inverted W or M on the prothorax. That's true for most of the morphs, not all. These are native ladybird beetles, and all of them are suffering where the Asian lady beetle has prospered because they are simply better competitors. So from the perspective of diversity, they are bad for ecosystems. It was a mistake to bring them in. Okay, what are those orange and black bugs on my milkweed? Should I kill them? Wonder why our default response is always to kill something. There's several species that are black and orange on milkweed. That is the signal that they have eaten something that tastes bad. It's an aposematic warning signal. And one of the most common ones, particularly this time of year, is the large milkweed bug, Onchopeltis fasciatus. It is a Lygeid bug, and it can be very common, particularly on the pods. These guys eat milkweed seeds. They stick their beaks through the pod covering the sheath here, and they eat the seeds underneath the pod. And they do it both as nymphs and as adults. And there's two reasons that they do it in aggregations. The aposematic warning signal is stronger, it's bigger when you have a bunch of the red and black things or orange and black things concentrated together. It sends a very strong signal to a bird that we don't taste good, don't bother with us. But there's also something called feeding facilitation. These guys have sucking mouth parts. So, it's a little straw. They stick it through the pod sheath here, and there's a solid seed under there. How can they suck up a solid seed through a straw? Well, they can't. So they digest it externally. What they do is they spit on that seed, and the seed digests externally, and then they suck up the remnants. And when you have a whole bunch of them spitting at the same time in the same place, it dissolves the seeds much more efficiently, and everybody gets to eat more efficiently. Now, people get upset, oh, they're going to eat all my milkweed seeds. No, it's just the first layer of seeds that they can reach. There are hundreds of seeds in this pod that they will never touch. These are a normal part of your milkweed fauna. And if you don't have them, there's something wrong. Another common orange and black inhabitant on milkweed is the milkweed tussock moth. It's beautiful as a late instar caterpillar. They're gregarious as well, and they eat a lot. They'll eat an entire milkweed ramet, no trouble at all. So it's another reason. So they're beautiful, but it's another, oh, by the way, the adult is not beautiful. It's just a bland moth. Another reason to have that big milkweed patch, so that you can have monarchs, you can have milkweed tussock moth, you can have milkweed beetles, a couple species of them. Everybody can be there without running out of food when you have enough milkweed. Could you provide your thoughts on the use of southern, more heat-tolerant species within more northern parts of the U.S.? That's called assisted migration, and I am not a fan of my assisted migration. And this is why. We're doing this because of climate change. Seems like the light in my room has just gone out here, but this is what happened to the jet stream. This is what the way the jet stream behaved in the old days before climate change. It wobbled a little bit, but not a whole lot. It was generally colder above the jet stream, particularly in the wintertime, and warmer below the jet stream. What's happening today with climate change is the jet stream has gone crazy. It's gotten really wobbly, which means when it wobbles north, then it's really warm up here, even in the wintertime, and it shouldn't be. But when it wobbles south, it's really cold down here where it shouldn't be, which is called the polar vortex. Remember, what, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, there was a polar vortex that went into southern Texas, even into Mexico, and it was so cold it even killed native plants. So when we move plants up from the south, we're still getting these polar vortices every single winter. Climate change is increased variability. It's not that gradual warming that you hear about. And those plants, any plants who move up from the south would be really vulnerable to those cold snaps. The other important thing is that we'd be moving plants away from the ecosystems in which they are supporting lots of organisms. So you take a plant from here and you move it up here, it leaves the organisms that require it down here, and then it's essentially a non-native plant not doing its job. So I think the real solution is to depend on the genetic variability in our plant populations to be able to adapt to the crazy weather that we're throwing at them, keep our fingers crossed. But I think moving plants up from the south is not the answer. It's controversial. There are people that do think it's the answer. So what do you think of no mow May? I think it's a good intention, but it's a bad idea. If you think about it, when you don't mow cool season European grass, you get tall cool season European grass. And this happened to a house down the street. It actually, the people moved out. They couldn't sell the house. Nobody was mowing it. And so, not unsightly, but is it good habitat? No, it's just tall grass that isn't supporting pollinators anyway. If you have a terrible lawn that's got a lot of dandelions or clover or dead nettle or a bunch of other things that actually do bloom and generalist pollinators go there, if you don't mow it, you're supplying forage for generalist pollinators in the month of May. But then you mow it in June and wipe out all of that resource. So the colonies that have been started, the reproduction that was started in May when you supplied food, you'd have just pulled the rug out from under them. So I think the real reason or the real response, the object of no mow May is to provide forage for pollinators. We need no mow areas where we never mow, and we call them pollinator gardens. So here's a pollinator garden that is in bloom. This is a later season version of the garden, but it has lots of things that are available for pollinators. You want to try to create a garden that has blooming plants from April all the way to the end of October. That's not easy, but that's the goal. And mowing it isn't part of that goal. So your lawn is never going to be a great resource for pollinators. What we need is less lawn and more areas like this. How should I remove lawn? Well, if you really are going to reduce the area of lawn, there's a couple of ways. You can smother it with something, black plastic, cardboard, builder's paper. You can use herbicide. That's what the professionals do. They can't wait months to kill your lawn. What doesn't work is digging up the turf and flipping it over as if that's going to kill it. That doesn't kill the roots, and you'll have big problems then. Or cutting it real short and then seeding over it. If you're seeding a meadow, the seed is expensive, and that is a sure way to waste a lot of money because cutting it short is not going to kill your grass. So here's the black plastic root. It will work, but it's a lot of work. It's a lot of black plastic, and it takes months to actually kill. You've got to kill the roots under here, or they will come roaring back and outcompete anything you plant. Here's the cardboard solution. And I've actually tried this. You lay down cardboard, then you cover it with mulch. It kind of worked, but you see this things here? That's plastic. It's the taping and the labels on the cardboard. And unless you meticulously remove that from all the cardboard, it is in your yard for years. I'm still pulling up plastic from the place I tried this. So I think this is the best solution. It's builder's paper. You know, if you go into a new construction, they put that gray paper on the floor so you don't mess it up. It degrades very quickly. You cover it with mulch of some kind and then plant right through it. You can't plant seeds, but you can put plugs right through it, and you never have to worry about pulling it up. No plastic or anything, and it's cheap. If you're going to use herbicide, there are grass-specific herbicides. So if you don't want to kill any of the broadleaf things that are already there, you can do that. And again, I know people they want to avoid herbicides, and I get it, but it really is an effective tool when used properly, when it's not overused or misused. I think of herbicides as chemotherapy. They're things we want to kill, and particularly invasive species. They're ecological tumors. It's just like the tumor in your body. We use chemotherapy to kill that. And if we don't, there's big problems. Well, if you don't remove the invasives, there's big problems. So it's a cost benefit. The benefit of removing them far outweighs the cost of using them properly. What do you think of Miyawaki forests? This is the tiny forest method that was developed by a Japanese forester named Akira Miyawaki way back in the 1970s. It's getting a lot of press right now, where you plant very densely in an area. Particularly, this is designed for urban areas where space is short, and you're trying to get some greenery and diversity into those areas. It apparently works pretty well in tropical areas. You get really dense planting, and those plants are used to high amounts of competition. It's a good community builder. A lot of people get interested in doing it. You can plant when the plants are really young, so you're not spending a lot of money on them. So there are advantages and disadvantages. The advantages are that the plant costs are low. Weeding is reduced when you plant really densely, so it's difficult for invasives and other things you don't want to get in there, which reduces maintenance costs. It creates high plant diversity very quickly, and theoretically, that will create high insect diversity and high insect density, which makes it a good place for other for insectivores to forage. Now, this hasn't been tested. I actually have a new student who started 2 days ago, who's gonna test this part. But these all seem to be important advantages of Miyawaki forests. The disadvantages is that the plants over time are going to compete with each other, and you will lose a number of them. And when I first heard about this concept, I said, well, gee, why don't you just plant a few plants and not have to lose all those plants over time? Well, these are the reasons that you might not want to do that, because if you only plant 2 or 3 trees in the same space, you have to maintain the area around those trees and weed it out through the 20 years you're waiting for during the time that this would grow. So I now am a fan of Miyawaki forests. I think the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. I often find the expense of purchasing native plants is out of my budget. Do you have any suggestions? Yeah, try what Rick Darke calls addition by subtraction. You don't actually plant anything. What you do is remove what you don't want and let nature plant the rest. So this is a scene from my yard several years ago. I didn't plant the andropogon. I didn't plant any of these asters. I didn't plant the goldenrod here. I didn't plant the milkweed. I did plant the oak as an acorn, and that's what it looked like. And I planted
That makes my heart happy. I love it. She looks great.
Everybody's got to mute. Make sure you're muted. This is Ilex verticillata. So I planted 2 things, but everything else came in naturally. How do they come in naturally? Animals bring them in, things like red squirrels and gray squirrels. He's moving a walnut around. Chipmunks move a lot of things. Blue jays are great seed movers, particularly beeches and acorns. They'll fly in from a good distance away and plant them in your yard. Ants move seeds all the time. So nature will put it back. The wind will bring it in. And you just have to be vigilant and remove the guys you don't want. This is a burning bush coming up. Turns red in the fall, so you get to see where it is. But look at it, it's 2 inches tall, very easy to get rid of, but you have to be vigilant. Otherwise, the ones you don't want will come in. But you haven't spent any money. Mosquito control companies say they're spraying a natural organic product that only kills mosquitoes. Is this true? No, it's not even close to true. It is natural in that it is based on pyrethroids that are produced by chrysanthemum, but they're produced synthetically, so that's not natural anymore, and they're also stronger than what the plant is making. There's two ways that mosquito control companies do this: through ultra low volume sprays that knock down the insects they come in contact with. So they knock down the mosquitoes that they come in contact with, but they also knock down the monarch. They knock down all the pollinators. The only advantage to this, and this is what townships are typically doing, the truck comes by and sprays this ultra low volume knockdown spray. The advantage is it's temporary. The knockdown is immediate. The insects are dead, but it doesn't keep killing them. You know, the truck moves on, and 2 hours later, it's gone. The guy you hire who comes into your backyard and sprays is spraying synthetic pyrethrins, not natural, as I said, and they are residual. They will stick to vegetation and be active for up to 90 days. So that's Mosquito Joe and others. So a caterpillar or pollinators that land on that infected vegetation, it's not studied very well, but chances are really good that it's going to kill them. We know that the knockdown kills monarchs because we've seen huge monarch kills after an event. This was a mosquito fogging event on Kent Island. My friend happened to be there. He picked up this handful of dead monarchs, but he said there were thousands on the ground because it was during a big migration event. Natural and organic, you know, even if it is natural and organic, so is cyanide, so is ricin. So that shouldn't mean anything to you. But it's blatant false advertising to say it only kills mosquitoes, because it kills all the insects it comes in contact with. Do you have a succinct statement to submit to my HOA who recently cited me for growing weeds? I got lots of succinct statements, but try this. We humans are facing life-threatening crises from climate change and biodiversity loss. Reducing the area of lawn and using more productive native plants in our landscapes addresses both of these crises. This can be done tastefully without reducing property values. It is the future of landscaping. I don't know if that'll work, but you can try it. Back to HOAs. My HOA believes native plantings reduce property values. How can I convince them otherwise? You know, this is a native planting. This is a Lynn O'Shaughnessy design, totally formal. Every plant in that landscape is a native plant. So it's not the nativity of the plant, the origin of the plant that bothers HOAs. It's the upkeep. It's the design. It's how well it's maintained. This landscape is 100% non-native. These are non-native azaleas. This is English ivy. This is Norway maple. This is pachysandra, but it's a mess because nobody's taking care of it. So again, it's the maintenance and the design rather than where the plant comes from. Keep in mind that our native plants are used in formal gardens in Europe all the time. They love them over there. So if they can love them, you know, your HOA can learn to love them too. This is an all-native landscape except for the grass here. This is Pam Carlson's house in Chicago. We can use lawn very tastefully as a cue for care. So we don't have very much lawn, but you can have a tastefully designed landscape. I don't think there's an HOA that would object to this, particularly if you didn't tell them where the plants came from. I have a small property. Should I plant several individuals of a few species, or should I try to squeeze as much diversity onto the property as possible, but only have one or two individuals of each species? Another good question I get all the time. And the answer is, it depends on what you're trying to manage. Let's say you're planting for the monarch. A single monarch or a single milkweed rammet is not enough. A monarch, just a few caterpillars can defoliate that, and then people get upset. So again, the big planting is the way to go if you're trying to manage for monarchs. But look, that's one species. It's not very diverse there. So again, it depends on what your target is. If you're trying to help pollinators, massing powerful pollinator plants is often a good idea, because the pollinators you're saving them energy. They don't want to have to move very far between flowers to get the pollen and nectar that they're using. This is where it be useful if you got to know your neighbors. Very few people, particularly in a suburban situation, have enough property where they can plant and manage everything with a lot of diversity and enough plants to make it work. But you can divide up the responsibilities. You can have a neighbor at one end of the street work on pollinator gardens of, and diversify those gardens at another yard. You can have people at other end of the street have the trees that are supporting the caterpillars that support the food web. So we need a certain amount of space to get the diversity that people are searching for, but you also need enough abundance to make it work. Oh, stop. Why do you want us to keep our leaves on our property? I'll just go quickly here. There's lots of reasons. The leaves form a blanket that protects the moisture in the soil. All the things that live in the soil require high moisture. And that includes the mycorrhizae fungi, which are essential to your plant nutrients. They return nutrients to the soil. All the nutrients that your tree used this past year are tied up in the leaves that fall to the ground. If those nutrients don't get back in the ground, you're starving your tree over time. And those leaves provide a lot of habitat. The soil harbors more species below the ground than are found above the ground. So it's a really productive ecosystem, but again, it requires high humidity. 250,000 mites per square meter, 100,000 springtails, columbilans per square meter, 90,000 proturans, those are primitive insects per square meter, 1 million nematodes. These guys are all breaking down those leaves so that the nutrients can return to the soil. And sometimes there's pretty butterflies that depend on dead leaves, like the banded hair streak. That's what they eat, dead oak leaves. 70 species of moths that we call litter moths depend on leaf litter, like the ambiguous litter moth, or the American idea, or the dark-spotted palthus, and 67 other species, and all the predators that depend on them, including lightning bugs, fireflies, whatever you want to call them. These guys are actually beetles. This is an adult, and there's the lantern that lights up, but that's what the larva looks like. It is a predator in leaf litter. You get rid of your leaf litter, you've gotten rid of all the fireflies, the lightning bugs. And of course, it's a great place for birds to forage. It is important habitat. Where do I put my leaves? Put them in your beds. That's how you reduce your lawn. My son bought a new house a couple of years ago. And the first fall, he called me up and he said, Dad, I've got too many leaves. Where should I put my leaves? Or he said, what should I do with my leaves? I said, put them in your flower beds. And he said, I don't have enough flower beds. And I said, exactly. That's how you reduce the lawn. Add flower beds, put the leaves in there, and your trees will be happy. You can, this is a homestay I did someplace, I don't know where I was, but these guys cordon off a part of their yard with rocks, and they put all their leaves into this area. You want to keep the leaves on your property that fall on your property, just the way you keep the water that falls on your property. That is proper land management. Will your plants be able to get up through those leaves? Yes, they will, a lot better than we think. Who was raking the leaves before we came along? And there were plants on this continent, believe me. This is trout lily coming up right through leaves, no problem. Here's wood poppies coming up through leaves in my yard. There they are, and then not long after, they're up and they're blooming. I didn't rake any of those leaves. Here are tiny little violets coming through in the spring. Again, I didn't rake my leaves. There they are a week later. There they are a couple of weeks after that. They make it through those leaves a lot better than we give them credit for. Can I mulch my leaves? In other words, run it through your lawnmower. You can. And it's better than not having leaves as mulch. But anything that was living in those leaves is going to get killed, including the Luna moth, cocoon, and lots of other things. If you can be happy not mulching them, that's the way to go. Do cultivars of native plants have the same ecological value as the parent species? Used to be the most common question I got. And the answer is it depends on the trait that was selected for the cultivar. This is Phlox paniculated Jenna. It's a variety that was actually created by nature. It was found in nature in Georgia. It was brought in, they put a name on it, and they tested it, and it actually has twice as many pollinators because it's got twice as many flowers. So the answer is it's not always bad. Functionally, a cultivar is not always bad. But we did a study looking at 6 different traits. Had nothing to do with flowers. These were more or less structural traits. When you enhance fall color, add leaf variegation, change the growth habit, take a tall plant, make it short, add disease resistance, enhance fall fruiting, changing a green leaf to red or purple. Those were the traits we looked at in a big common garden experiment. And we found that the only trait that consistently reduced insect use was taking a green leaf and making it red or purple, because you've loaded these leaves with anthocyanins. So the very popular red leaf cultivars are going to have reduced wildlife value. Flowers, it's not as, the answer is not as good. I'm losing my ability to talk. This is a double flower bloodroot. What that means is the reproductive parts of the flower have been turned into petals. Really, really pretty, but there's absolutely no value to pollinators from a flower like this. A lot of hydrangeas are like this. It's actually a detriment to pollinators because they come in thinking there is something to eat when there's not. So they're wasting a lot of energy. Annie White at the University of Vermont did a study with lots of flowering plants. And more often than not, when we change a trait of a flower, we're destroying the specialized relationship between the specialist bees that require that flower and the flower itself. But if you want the latest information on cultivar trial tests, go to Mount Cuba Center's website. See if I have it here. There you go. And they're doing a lot of comparisons of straight species and their cultivars in their trial garden, and they're posting results on their website. Dozens and dozens of these. So the very latest answer to whether or not a particular cultivar is helping or not can be found on this website. What is Homegrown National Park's mission? Homegrown National Park, of course, that's the nonprofit that Michelle Alfandari and I started in, a couple of years ago. Why should I join and get on the map? Well, our mission is this. We're trying to motivate millions of people to regenerate biodiversity in the way that regenerates biodiversity, by planting the native plants that supports it, by removing the invasive species that do not support biodiversity. And in doing this, we're going to build a culture that's sympathetic to the needs of conservation. We're trying to reach the non-choir, the millions and millions and millions of people that don't realize they have the responsibility and the opportunity to practice conservation where they live. This is the biodiversity map we're talking about. We want people to register their property on the map, the location and the amount of area you're going to be a good steward of. Maybe you're going to reduce the area of lawn. Maybe you're going to plant an oak tree. Maybe you're going to put an aster in a flower pot. Doesn't matter how small it is, but you put that information into the database and your little piece of your county is going to light up. And of course, our mission is to get the entire country to light up. So why should you join Homegrown? And by the way, it's free, doesn't cost you anything. By recording the successful conservation that you're doing on your property, and this includes land conservancies, by the way, we get a quantifiable record of conservation on private property. We have this 30 by 30 initiative. It's actually a UN initiative, but President Biden signed on to it, where we're going to save 30% of the country by 2030. The only way that's going to happen is if we record conservation on private property. And right now, nobody's doing this other than our biodiversity map. It also creates an opportunity for states to compete with each other. So notice they're color-coded. The darker green you are, the more participants there are. So, people like competition. North Carolina here has got to get going. Those are 2 reasons why you should join Homegrown National Park. Okay, does urban restoration work? The really important question. Are we encouraging creating ecological traps that lure animals to their death? People worry about that, and it's a legitimate worry, but the more studies that are being done seem to support the fact that no, it actually is working. Emily Geist in Omaha, Nebraska did a big study with monarchs and private gardens in cities versus monarchs in more rural areas. And the monarchs in the cities did as well or better than the monarchs in the rural areas in terms of survivorship. Look what artificial nest boxes by people in their yards did for bluebirds. Bluebirds were headed, I don't know about extinction, but they were really in trouble in the 50s and 60s and early 70s. But all of a sudden, a lot of people started putting up bluebird boxes, and now it's one of the most common birds, particularly in the East. Big study by Benedict Schmidt in Switzerland in an urban area in Switzerland. He studied 12 species of amphibians, and by putting in artificial ponds throughout the cities, roads and everything right there throughout the cities, they increased the populations of 10 of the 12. The 2 that did not increase were because the ponds that they put in were not big enough for those particular species. So when it's been studied, it really does look like we can turn this around. Okay, what gives you hope? How do you not become discouraged by the task at hand? There's actually several reasons I am hopeful. One of them is that the biodiversity crisis is now, it's part of the global discussion. There was a big meeting by the UN 2 years ago in Montreal to talk about the biodiversity crisis. You know what the UN does, they talk about it and they make resolutions, and we all ignore the resolutions. But at least they're talking about, they're recognizing that this is a serious environmental crisis. What really gives me hope, though, is that the public is starting to recognize that we as individuals are not powerless when it comes to conservation. There's a whole bunch of things we can do. We can shrink the lawn. We got 44 million acres of lawn. We can reduce that. We can choose the proper plants. We can focus on the plants that are going to produce the most food for food webs. We call them keystone plants. These are easy decisions that people can make and are making. We can change out our white bulbs in our outdoor lighting for yellow bulbs, because yellow wavelengths don't attract nocturnal insects. Very easy thing to do. We can fire mosquito joe because it's not doing what it says it's doing. We can put beds under our trees. So when the caterpillars fall down to pupate underground, the ground is not compacted. They can get under there successfully and pupate. It also reduces the lawn by putting beds under our trees. We can plant pollinator gardens, big or small, and that will help pollinator diversity in all kinds of places. We can remove the invasive plants that are on our properties. More and more municipalities are actually paying people to do these things to reduce the lawn, like Minnesota has been doing with a cost-sharing program. Some states are starting to ban the sale of invasive plants. Delaware has done that. Massachusetts, Oregon, South Carolina, to name just a few, and other states are banning particular invasive plants. So that's an improvement as well. HOAs are starting to learn that native landscaping is not going to lower property values. That's a huge step forward. And the farming community is coming on board too. We're changing the roadside lawns that now line our corn and soybeans and wheat throughout the country to productive habitats the way they used to be. A huge advance in terms of the diversity on farmland. We're also starting to include prairie strips. Right through the corn and right through the soybeans. This intercepts topsoil before it leaves the farm. It intercepts pollutants before it leaves the farm, and it creates a lot of habitat for pollinators. It's win-win for everybody. It's also paid for by CRP funding. But what's encouraged me the most is the speed with which these changes are happening. It's happening far faster than I ever thought it would. Okay, final question. If you were to give advice about the best thing we could do to support our environment, what would it be? It would be to vote. It would be to vote. Never vote for somebody who denies the existence of science. Never vote for somebody who puts short-term monetary gain over the health of the ecosystems that support everybody, support you, your kids, your grandkids, and all the things around you. We would not have the crises that were confronting us today if everyone prioritized environmental issues in the voting booth. So that would be my advice, and that is my final word tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doug. I'm just filled with thoughts on what I want to do. We've got some some good questions that I'm going to just run through quickly. And first of all, I have a question from Beverly. Can I mix grass cuttings into my oak leaves and just let them all break down together along the edges of my property?
Sure, why not?
All right, I love it. This is the fire drill answer. I like it.
Well,
So that's
one caveat there. If they're green grass cuttings, they can generate heat as they break down. So you don't want to pile them together because that will get quite hot. But if you disperse them out amongst the leaves, it should be fine.
excellent. Okay, next on the lightning round. I planted common milkweed in my garden and now it's in my lawn. How do I reclaim? It says, how do I reclaim my garden? But I think maybe she means, how do I reclaim my lawn?
I would not reclaim your lawn. I'd say, well, that's one way I've reduced my lawn. If you really are talking about it taking over your garden. Yeah, that's a management issue. How much of your garden do you want to allocate to milkweed? It's stoloniferous. It does travel underground. One way people try to contain it is to get some flashing, aluminum flashing that's maybe 6 inches wide, and kind of bury that in the ground so the rabbits can't get through it, and then it can't get beyond that. But you actually have a good problem. Most people are trying to expand their milkweed patches, not try to contain it. So I would take advantage of that.
Excellent. Lindsay asks, how will removing seed pods from milkweed affect the plant?
Not at all.
Okay.
The seed pods fall off in the fall anyway. That's what they do. You mean it remove it as they're developing it? Will it flower again? Probably not. So,
Okay.
but at the end of the year, removing them, yeah.
All right. And MBK asks, what was the builder paper you talked about to use to convert turf space to a meadow?
That's what it's called, gray builder paper. If you put that in Google, it'll pop up. What's it made of? It's a paper-like material, but it degrades and breaks down quickly.
Excellent. Okay, let's see. This is Peter. I left leaf litter on my garden over the winter, but then had damage to root system by voles. Solution?
Yeah, voles are an issue. Voles are an issue. It's really frustrating when I start a tree from seed and it gets to be 5 years old and 6 feet tall, and a vole girdles it and kills it. I get angry at that too. It shows you've got more life on your property. It's just one of those management issues. You want to encourage foxes, you want to encourage your hawks, you want to encourage, don't ever kill a black rat snake. They're eating those voles. But they reproduce really quickly and they can get out of hand. And no, I don't have a good solution. I mean, you can try trapping them and stuff, but
Yeah. Okay. Next from Susan, what would you suggest to plant to replace privet hedges? And thank you for all your good work.
we had this idea that a hedge has to be a single species. It doesn't. It can be a diversity of species. So if you live up in New England, people plant hedges as screens for the most part. So, privet's pretty good for that, but so is eastern red cedar, good for that. Any conifer is going to be a good screen. Actually, I shouldn't say that. Don't, white pine gets so big so fast that it drops its bottom branches, and then all of a sudden your screen is gone. You've got a row of big trees, but you don't have a screen anymore. But a diversity of plants, and you can make your hedge a little bit fatter than you're used to. That also reduces lawn. But adding things like I like verticillata that makes the winterberry, the very nice berries all winter long. Witch hazel, a whole bunch of things. We have what we call a conifer conundrum, in that there aren't that many species of conifers that are small enough to use as landscape plants. The eastern red cedar is probably the most common and the best, and will do in lots, really well in lots of places. If you're really far north, you can move into the firs. They do well, but it doesn't have to be one species. That's hemlocks, stuff like that.
All right. Now, Margaret asks, How do you feel about increasing the bricks measurement in gardens for natural pest control? Bricks spelled BRIX.
Remind me what the bricks measurement is?
I don't know. Maybe Margaret will tell us if she gets back on again. So I'm going to move on to Susan's question. How do you feel rain barrels are worthwhile?
Oh, yeah, certainly. We get a lot of rain, you don't need to collect it, but when you get that drought, the 80 gallons you might have in a typical rain barrel can be a real aid in preserving water and using it during periods of short supply. You want to put a screen over it so the mosquitoes aren't breeding in it, but the water that comes off your roof can be captured and used very productively. Otherwise, it's essentially lost very quickly. I had a rain barrel until we got one of those polar vortexes. It froze the water in there and split it, and I haven't replaced it yet. So be wary of that. In the wintertime, you might want to drain it.
So I'm getting word that bricks is the measurement of the hotness of peppers.
Oh,
as a for natural pest control.
So if you're growing peppers that are really hot, it's going to keep insects away?
I don't know. Okay, we'll move on.
I have to plead ignorance on this. I don't.
Okay. So Kara is asking, she says, I recently read about a study that suggested that leaf litter from certain invasive plants may promote more mosquitoes. They looked at autumn olive and honeysuckle in particular. They also found that blackberries actually reduced mosquito survival. Are you aware of any other research on the effect of invasive plants on mosquito and tick populations?
No, mosquitoes do not breed in leaf litter.
Okay.
So unless the leaf litter is in an aquatic situation, so if you have a pond and you're trying to keep mosquitoes out of it and you add autumn olive leaves, is that what they're talking about? But mosquitoes don't breed in blackberries or leaf litter. You need to have water. Mosquitoes breed in temporary water. In permanent bodies of water, the predators come in and they eat the mosquitoes. So having a pond in your yard is not a mosquito generator. It's having a rut that fills up during the storm and then sits there for 2 weeks and then is drained. Because the mosquitoes breed and get out of there before the predators can find it.
Got it. So Josh asks, if you plant enough natives directly into your lawn, would they eventually overtake the lawn?
It depends on what you planted. Woody plants will. It'll shade it out. But lawn, if you're planting prairie plants or herbaceous plants, those, particularly from seed, those guys start out really small and grass is really competitive. Chances are the grass is going to win. Remember, if you're not mowing your lawn, it gets tall. And if it gets tall, it shades out those little things that are in there. And if you do mow it, you've mowed what you just planted. So it's very difficult to start a successful pollinator garden without getting rid of the grass first.
Gotcha. And we now have yet another clarification on bricks.
Right.
It's a measure of sugar. And Margaret heard that higher sugar contact means less pests.
Higher sugar contact of the plants in your yard.
Okay, I'm getting further clarification. Bricks can be used to measure sucrose found within vegetables. La 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 la. Okay, so that's as much as we know. We may not still have an answer to that. It's all right to come up short.
Well, it sounds like a vegetable gardening question.
Yeah.
And remember, we're growing. Having vegetable gardens in your yard is a good thing. You're controlling what goes on those vegetables. You're minimizing transportation costs, but you're not planting it for biodiversity. You're planting it for food for you. So two different goals.
Right. So I just want to mention for those of us who we still have a pretty good complement of everyone on board. If you aren't aware yet, we are holding a pollinator pathway tour on September 15th in Barrington. It's free, and you're going to get to see a lot of pollinator gardens that are in various stages of coming to fruition. And so I hope you'll go on our website and check that out and check out some of the other programs that we've got. any let's see, I think we've gotten to all the questions. There was one lovely message from Susan she says that I love people who walk past our house, see the leaves unraked, and don't think we've disappeared. And I think, as you know, one thing I've discovered is that as more and more people in our town get interested in leaving the leaves or in planting pollinator gardens and embracing kind of the somewhat messiness of it, that we're seeing some really beautiful gardens, and we're all kind of getting collective permission to try our hand at this. And your talk has been so inspiring, Doug, and thank you so much for coming to be with us.
You're welcome. Thanks very much, everybody.
You are welcome, and we consider you a friend. Visit us anytime.
Thank you.
All right. And
I'm going to say goodbye now.
all right. Goodbye, Doug, and goodbye to all of our friends for joining us. Thanks for joining us. And we hope that you'll come to our Pollinator Pathway tour. Bye, everybody.